When Hurricane Melissa slammed into the Caribbean, it ripped through Cuba, Haiti and Jamaica.
The place was so devastated. I don't know.
Coming up, storms like Melissa are now part of environmental norms, and hundreds of thousands of people die every year. But as a planet, do we care?
When it comes to the climate crisis, it's so overwhelming. It's hard to wrap your head around it.
We look at the humanity behind climate action and how what moves us as individuals shapes whether we choose to act or look away. Can the UN realistically win this fight?
Everyone has their own social media universe. And so sometimes to break out of that means you have to be curious.
Just 2 Degrees is on now.
You know, shortcuts that leave out justice are just going to make the journey longer if they don't get people on board.
This concrete shell used to be a structure to a family of 5 on Crane Road in Jamaica's coastal town of Black River. The galvanized roof is gone, as you can see. The windows and doors were ripped clean off, and all that's left are damp mattresses and tangled sheets everywhere. Hurricane Melissa was a Category 5 storm and the strongest ever recorded to hit Jamaica. Scores of people were killed, including across Haiti and Cuba. This is Pamela Foster, one of many people in Jamaica who spent days after Hurricane Melissa clearing debris from what used to be home.
The place was so devastated. I don't know. I was looking for it, but I don't know. I just couldn't manage. I just couldn't manage the situation. Even though I see it, been through it, but the managing direct part wasn't that good. So I go. Just have to cry to ease the pain. The pain, don't know. But it just like your heart, stomach just burst. It just too much. When I get over emotion, I just cry. Just try to cry, but I try to hide it from them. I try to be strong with them, but deep inside I'm crying. I'm really, really crying. But I just like hide it. Yes. We will survive. We will survive. We will survive. I reach and I see what it is like, and I have some place to come to. And my other sister, them don't have anything to go to. And them lost everything. They don't have a bed to go lean up one side and dry. And thank God I can find a bed to sleep on. So even though they are soaking wet, but we can lean them up with the water can and drain out. If we even sit up, we will manage. We will manage.
I'm sure you heard this before, but what we saw in Jamaica isn't an isolated tragedy, but part of a recurring pattern. Because while storms get stronger, our global response isn't. The State of Climate Action 2025 report from the World Resources Institute says none of the key indicators for cutting emissions and protecting nature are on track. Not a single one. 3/4 are moving in the right direction, but far too slowly. In fact, most need to speed up at least 2 to 4 times this decade to keep the 1.5 degree target alive. That means phasing out coal, halting deforestation and protecting our food systems. All of it needs to happen way faster than we're doing it right now. And that brings us to a topic we don't talk too much about in this program, us. Because honestly, the climate crisis is really a story about values, not just science. There are 10 basic human values identified by psychologists that shape how we live and how we respond to when the planet needs help. So in the end, how we respond to the climate crisis is about a lot more than our government's policies or the corporations that capitalize on our needs. It's about us and about whether our values match our actions. And as storms get stronger, what happens next depends on what and who we choose to value most. So if our values show what matters to us, then finance reveals how much it really matters. Because right now, the world says it values climate action, but the money tells a different story. Ahead of COP30, the latest reports show that global climate finance is still far below what's needed to protect people's lives and their jobs. Adaptation funds remain just a fraction of what developing nations require, while fossil fuel subsidies still outweigh green investments. I called up Teresa of ActionAid. The organization released a report that provides alarming insight into a critical failure of global climate finance. Teresa, ActionAid's report basically says we're out of time, yet we're still expanding the industries that are driving planetary collapse. Your company, interestingly, points out that billionaire Jeff Bezos has spent over $600 million in a super yacht, considerably more than multilateral climate funds have spent on just transition across the global south. What do you think explains that contradiction that most governments pledge climate action, but still subsidize fossil and agri-giants?
Well, this is an absolute contradiction that governments are talking climate action, but not putting people first when they want to roll out climate action. And we know that that is actually leading to delays, resistance, concerns, climate skepticism. So what the takeaway that we have is that we need climate action to grow up a bit, to put people at the center. And this is what's needed to sort of unlock and unleash the climate action we need. So we've done this report because we know there's not enough climate finance. We know that there's too much climate finance in the form of loans rather than grants. But really, we wanted to understand, as climate plans roll out, how much are workers, women and communities really being supported and protected so that they can make sure that climate transitions are benefiting them. And so we've really looked into this term just transition. The term just transition means taking specific steps to make sure that local communities have the chance to shape climate plans that might affect them, and that they can get the right support, they can get the new job opportunities, they can get the training they need to make sure that transition really works for them, and that it doesn't accidentally push them into poverty. And we're in a political moment with a lot of climate uncertainty, with rising cost of living, economic uncertainty, job insecurity. So it's not surprising if people feel a bit worried that climate action might actually increase their daily cost for food or energy or transport, or indeed lead to job insecurity. But just transition is key because it's about taking steps to make sure that we bring people's needs and climate transition together. No one should be cutting corners when it comes to cutting emissions, and no one should have to choose even between job security and a safe planet. So that's why we've looked into how much climate finance is really going to just transition, and we analysed the two major multilateral climate funds called the Green Climate Fund and also the Climate Investment Funds. We checked to see how many of their projects are really rolling out just transitions. We were really shocked by our findings. We had several just transition indicators. We found that only 3% of multilateral climate finance is actually meeting our just transition criteria, and only 1 in 50 projects is really taking the steps to listen to communities and make sure that they are protected so that they can bridge properly to the other side and feel fully confident that climate action's going to work for them. So this tells us that there is a real gap, that it is time for climate action to grow up, that it's time for just transitions, which we can think of as climate action 2.0, because shortcuts that leave out justice are just going to make the journey longer if they don't get people on board, and if they risk unintended harm, backlash and delay, that is going to hold back the climate action further.
Speaking of transition, your report says meeting 100% of the globe's energy needs is actually possible with today's renewables. So in ActionAid's view, why can't we seem to just make it there then?
Well, I think we have several gaps in, particularly climate finance is the major gap. The Global South really needs to roll out renewable energy, both to address the climate crisis, to leapfrog fossil fuel developments, and because renewable energy can actually meet local communities' needs far better than fossil fuel can. But we see a huge lack of climate finance. This is the same story that we hear every COP, and it's only getting worse.
We need to agree a new target for climate finance that meets developing country needs.
We send a clear and strong signal that more public and private finance will be allocated to climate targets.
As you probably remember, last UN climate negotiations in Baku in Azerbaijan, we really had hopes that rich countries would deliver on climate finance, but instead they just crossed their arms and turned their backs and only offered paltry amounts in loans rather than real grants.
We have more than 1,700 snakes slithering about, poisoning climate action, spreading their toxin.
Teresa, on this episode, we're looking at human values. You might prioritize you and your family's security. I might care more about power and self-advancement. How do we address the crisis as a globe when we all care about different things?
That's a great question, Reagan. I think the answer is that we take climate negotiations really seriously. That is the place where we can try to find the common strategies that can work for everyone, the common principles, the common processes that can help everyone's needs to be met.
It was good seeing you, Teresa. Thanks. All right, it's time for Just to Matter, where the little things mean everything. And today, it's something most of us never think about. A tiny percentage on paper that quietly decides who gets help and who keeps waiting. Interest rates. Every loan, from your home mortgage to a government climate fund, comes with an interest rate. It's basically the cost of borrowing money and the figure that decides how much extra you'll keep paying long after the loan is spent. So 2/3 of global climate finance is not free support, it's loans, which need to be repaid with interest. 3%, 5%, maybe 8%. Sounds tiny, right? But if you're a country already drowning in debt, that tiny number can mean billions of dollars. Money that could have been used to build flood barriers or renewable grids instead heads straight back to creditors. And those rates have big impacts on climate projects and can trap countries in debt cycles. That's why some can't rebuild after disasters or prepare before the next one hits. For example, a Reuters investigation revealed that Ecuador and other developing nations got some $18 billion in climate funding from wealthy countries, but mostly as loans with market rate interest. Money meant to help them adapt came with a catch, and lenders often required them to hire their own firms. So much of that aid flowed right back to the lenders, and the rich countries got richer. And the irony is, nations that cause most of the emissions are often the ones collecting the interest from those suffering from the consequences of the damage. Economists have a name for it: climate colonialism by spreadsheet. So the next time you see a big headline about climate finance, ask yourself, how much of that help comes with strings, and how tightly are they tied? Interest rates are small numbers, but they decide who gets to adapt and who ends up paying the ultimate price. And that brings us to a timely campaign by the United Nations Development Programme. It's called Climate Counts, #ClimateCounts. And it's a walkthrough of important but relatable facts that concern all of us, from the billions of people, including you and me, who are vulnerable to climate shocks because of where we live, to the young people fighting for us all in the courts. We called up the UNDP, and the organization's global director of climate change picked up. Cassie, this Climate Counts campaign is designed to make climate change feel personal to people. We've been discussing human values on this episode, which highlight that what you and I care about may differ and hence impact how we respond to the crisis. I'm guessing creating these cards in a way that really appeals to people's humanity was really challenging.
It was immensely challenging. And I think here, when it comes to the climate crisis, it's so overwhelming. And not only do you see these huge impacts in the news, like the devastation following Hurricane Melissa, and the wildfires and the droughts, it's hard to wrap your head around it. And we know that people get a lot of information from various, social media channels or influencers. And what we wanted to do was to say, okay, what are the things that you need to know about this crisis? What are 30 numbers that we can put forward, each with a story behind them? Some of these numbers are talking about the stakes of the climate crisis, and other numbers are talking about more hopeful pieces and what we can do, and reminders of that solutions are out there. And this is something that was really important to us, because we want everyone, even when you may not have a scientific background or a policy background or an expertise in the climate crisis, that this is about how you can understand more of it, how you can relate to it, and how you can feel that you can be a part of the solution.
I've seen over the years how the UN has struggled to stress the importance of SDGs and NDCs, but based on conversations I've had, people get easily confused by the climate acronyms and jargon, and then turned off. So how does climate counts help?
Yeah, the UN is certainly guilty of a lot of acronyms and sort of numbers and figures and charts and graphs that are trying to really portray the state of the world. But in today's world, people need to be able to have information at their fingertips. They need to be able to understand things quickly. And this is something that we really worked hard to kind of break it down. And this is why all of the numbers are and the stories are relatable. They are ways to kind of think about the climate crisis in a very personal way that helps make it more understandable. One of my favorites is actually number 8. And the reason it's one of my favorites is because it's 8 out of 10 people want their governments to do something about the climate crisis. And this, I think, is a really important reminder to us all that this is actually something that there's a lot of unity about in the world, that people agree with each other. And even when they disagree on vastly other things, that when it comes to the climate crisis, they know we need to do something. One of the things that keeps coming up for us is how bold some of these choices are. Changing an energy system is not a small choice. Having early warning systems or ways to strategically combat wildfires, these are choices that require policy, require financing, require teams and institutions to be able to carry them out.
Your campaign also tackles climate disinformation, something that's exploded in recent years. Many people distrust government, media, UN institutions. I won't call leaders' names, but considering how fast and far misinformation has been spreading, is this a fight the UN can realistically win?
The question here is how do we navigate this? Because we are in this new world. And on the climate crisis, and this is something that's really important, is that we all need to be curious and listening to the people that have experienced Hurricane Melissa, because we need to. Because also, something about climate change is it is not a future crisis; it's a now crisis.
I'd love to get your take on the climate summits of late, which have been receiving a lot of negative press. People, including prominent environmentalists, question whether COP30 will be another haven for fossil fuel lobbyists and deal making in private rooms. What do you say to people who distrust the COP conferences?
If we didn't have the Paris Agreement, we would be on track to a world that is 4 degrees. That is utterly devastating. We would see entire parts of the world just essentially places you could no longer live. But because of the Paris Agreement, countries have worked together and we've been able to ratchet down that pathway. So now we're more close to a 2.5 degree world, way off from where we should be. And I share a lot of the frustrations from scientists and environmentalists who say we have to do more and we have to do it faster. I agree. But we have a much better starting point because of the Paris Agreement than if we didn't have it.
A decade ago, the world convened in Paris and agreed that climate change was a serious and very real threat to our survival. After arduous discussions and arguments, countries finally agreed to a treaty, one that included a pathway to limit and, in some cases, reverse what we've done to the planet. But things have not turned out as planned. Numerous plant and animal species have become extinct, and hundreds of thousands of people have been killed in climate disasters. we're also faced with increasingly dangerous levels of toxins in our air, including microplastics and the fumes from polluting industries. It's not that we haven't tried to make things right, but every COP summit since Paris has been an uneven mix of breakthrough and failure. Let's trace that journey from 2015 to today to see what's been achieved and what we urgently need to address in Brazil at COP30.
COP21 was a pledge to curb greenhouse gas emissions and keep global heating well below 2 degrees Celsius, but trying even harder to prevent temperatures from rising by 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. There were many COPs before it, beginning with the first Global Climate Summit in 1979 in Geneva. But for the sake of time, we'll begin in Paris in 2015. This conference was a pact built on trust, with each country allowed to set its own targets. The next year in Marrakesh, the so-called Action COP was about turning the Paris Accords promises into plans. Countries focused on designing the rules of 1.5 and the funding it would take to make it all a reality.
Reiterate our resolve to inspire solidarity, hope and opportunity for current and future generations.
Then came COP23 in Bonn, Germany. Delegates tried to complete the Paris rulebook, but arguments, disagreements, and delay closed the summit. But they did manage to launch the Talanoa dialogue, meant to raise ambition and give vulnerable nations more say in the process.
The issue of violence is always a problem in these negotiations.
In Poland, COP24 finally delivered the Paris rulebook, guidelines for how countries would track and report their emissions. But tensions remained over the responsibilities and obligations of developed versus developing nations.
We agreed we all have to act, but the questions as to how to do it remain on the table.
Unresolved issues at COP24 dominated Madrid the next year. Countries could not agree on how carbon markets should work. Rich nations dodged finance and adaptation commitments, and big emitters refused to boost their targets. So much so that activists described it as a lost COP.
Las nuevas generaciones esperan más de nosotros.
In 2020, there was a brief pandemic pause, but Glasgow reignited the climate momentum the next year. And for the first time, a COP summit called for the phase down of coal. Glasgow also delivered the framework for global carbon markets, but once again, no deal on climate finance.
We've had so many disappointments in this process.
A year later, COP27 in Egypt made history with the Loss and Damage Fund, a mechanism that in theory would give vulnerable nations access to financial support after climate-related damages. But holding to account those who caused disasters, no concessions made there.
Et notamment, il n'y a toujours pas d'accord sur l'inclusion de la sortie des énergies fossiles, alors qu'on sait à quel point est-ce que les énergies fossiles sont vraiment capitales pour lutter. Enfin, la sortie des énergies fossiles est vraiment capitale pour lutter contre le changement climatique.
And then came COP28 Dubai. Our Just 2 Degrees team was there and witnessed big oil and renewable lobbyists unwillingly share the stage. We can't overcome the climate crisis without including the oil, mining, and dairy industries, they said. And some of it paid off. Intense, very intense debates led to an agreement, a transition away from fossil fuels, words never before written in a COP final document. But even that was controversial.
It seems that you just gaveled the decisions and the small island developing states were not in the room.
There was intense focus on money at the so-called Finance COP, the conference in Baku last year.
In my view, COP29 will be remembered as the start of a new era for climate finance.
But that wasn't how things panned out. Wealthy nations did pledge about $300 billion a year by 2035, a far cry from the $1.3 trillion developing nations say is needed.
This is an insult to what the convention says.
The Baku Declaration also reaffirmed the transition away from fossil fuels and called on nations to triple their renewable capacity. Also, the long-awaited global carbon market was finally operationalized, a way for polluters to balance their emissions by investing in climate projects overseas, particularly in the global south. Now, Brazil kicks off the so-called Amazon COP. But it's the same old fight. Developing nations are still demanding more than $1 trillion annually to scale up their resilience and adaptation capabilities, and for a fund that more or less ensures disasters when they destroy homes and agricultural lands. And Brazil's already made promises to be the COP that makes a real difference. The country's touting a $125 billion Tropical Forest Forever Fund to reward rainforest protection. But critics fear it could become another offset loophole.
And that's our show. So we began this episode about human values and how they shape how we respond as individuals to climate issues. But if, hypothetically, I prioritize having fun and you don't, and you care more about coral reefs than I do, then is it truly possible to address the crisis together? It may depend on whether we can recognize the connection between how much we need the planet to enjoy the things we love.